All right, welcome. Now, if you're a UPSC aspirant, you already know that some moments in history aren't just dates to memorize, they're genuine turning points. Today, we are diving deep into one of those absolute game changers, the Charter Act of 1833.
You know, back in the early 19th century, this was the big question facing the British in India. Was the East India Company a business, or was it a government? It was trying to be both, and it was becoming pretty clear that something had to give. This identity crisis really set the stage for some radical change.
Now, to really get why the 1833 Act was such a big deal, we need to rewind a little. You had earlier laws like the Regulating Act and Pitt's India Act that tried to sort of, rein in the company. But that's all they were, really, just patches on a system that was bursting at the seams. By the 1830s, everyone knew a complete overhaul was the only way forward.
So what was the problem at its core? I mean, why was this reform so incredibly urgent? Let's get right into the thick of it and look at the crisis that made the Charter Act an absolute necessity.
So you got to picture this. The East India Company is juggling two massive jobs at once. On one hand, it's a for-profit trading company with a powerful monopoly. On the other, it's trying to govern a huge subcontinent. This created this massive conflict of interest, which led to, you guessed it, widespread corruption, total inefficiency, and a whole lot of criticism back home in Britain.
Okay, so we've got the problem. Now, what about the solution? Let's dive into the Charter Act of 1833 itself. And listen, this wasn't just another Band-Aid solution. This was a brand new blueprint designed from the ground up to centralize, formalize, and really cement British rule in India. Here's the single most important thing to understand about this act. It completely changed the East India Company's job description. Its days as a trading giant were over. That incredibly lucrative monopoly on tea and the China trade? Gone. From 1833 onward, the company had one purpose, and one purpose only, to be the administrative machine for the British Crown in India. All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts of the act. For all you UPSC folks, this is where you'll want to lean in, because these are the high-value, exam-worthy points you absolutely need to know.
The absolute centerpiece of this whole new system was the creation of the Governor-General of India, with Lord William Bentinck being the first to get the title. And this was so much more than a name change. It was a massive consolidation of power, putting all civil and military authority for the entirety of British India into the hands of a single person.
And this slide, it just perfectly shows you what that centralization looked like in practice. The power to make laws, which used to be held by the local presidencies like Madras and Bombay, was completely stripped away. They couldn't make their own laws anymore. All of that authority was now concentrated with the Governor-General and his council. Period. But it wasn't just about centralization. The act did a lot more. It threw open the doors to European immigration and let them own land, which, as you can imagine, paved the way for more colonization. It also made lawmaking more professional by adding a legal expert to the council. And, really importantly, it took a firm stand against slavery, setting in motion the process that led to its abolition just 10 years later. Okay, now, Section 87. This is fascinating. On paper, it looks incredible, like a modern Declaration of Equality. In reality, though, it was hardly ever enforced. But, and this is the key part, this clause became a powerful weapon for early Indian nationalists. Thinkers like Dadabhai Naoroji would later point to this very section to highlight the hypocrisy of British rule and to demand the rights that were promised right here in writing. So, we've gone through the features, the nuts and bolts, but what's the big picture here? What did all of this actually mean in the long run? Let's shift gears and talk about the Act's true significance and how it built the very framework of the subcontinent's administration.
So if we're talking long-term impact, there are three huge takeaways. First, centralization. This act created one unified government for British India for the very first time. Second, the codification of laws. This led to the famous Indian Law Commission under Lord Macaulay, which laid the groundwork for things like the modern Indian Penal Code. And third, it introduced the principle of meritocracy, the idea that government jobs should be open to Indians based on ability, not race or religion.
But, and this is a huge but, the act was far from perfect. And for any good critical analysis, the kind you need for your exams, it is absolutely essential to understand the major shortcomings and the new problems this act actually created. You see, that laser focus on centralization, it actually backfired in some ways. It made governing far-flung regions really difficult. And while the presidencies of Madras and Bombay lost their power to make laws, they got zero representation at the center. And what about those lofty ideals in Section 87?
Well, in practice, the administration remained overwhelmingly dominated by the British.
When you really boil it down, the Charter Act of 1833 was a true double-edged sword. On one side, it created the foundations of a modern, streamlined administrative state. But on the other, it tightened the screws and perfected the machinery of imperial control.
So I want to leave you with this question to think about. Was the Charter Act of 1833 a necessary modernizing step that laid the foundation for a unified India, or was it actually the ultimate blueprint for perfecting imperial domination? The answer, as it so often is with history, is complicated, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle.